Hi, and welcome to this week's small group. Hopefully, you enjoyed this last Sunday when we talked about Elijah on the top of Mount Carmel. What an amazing story. But before we jump into the continuation of that story, I want a couple of the people in your small group to tell the story of a time in your life when you were completely convinced that something would happen. But in the end, it didn't work out the way that you thought it would. And the most important part of you telling this story is I want you to tell, how you felt when things did not work out the way that you thought. Let me tell you, Elijah, after being on Mount Carmel, was convinced that, finally the Israelites would follow after Yahweh and not after Baal. Surely the king Ahab is going to follow Yahweh. But come to find out, things didn't work out the way that he thought they would. And so what I want you to do is read 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 4, and answer these questions. Why do you think Elijah is so fearful when God has just done this huge miracle on Mount Carmel? And the second thing I want you to see is that it is not uncommon for people to experience real lows after a significant spiritual event in their lives. Why might this be? The truth is that this story of Elijah may hit a little close to home for some of us. Because maybe some of us have either been through a time of depression or we're going through one now. So like Elijah, have you ever told God that you've had enough? And what was it that got you to that place? And the second question is, do true Christians get depressed? And is depression a sign of unbelief or a lack of faith? There's not too many people that would say that Christians never get depressed. But sometimes, unconsciously, we end up beating ourselves up for being depressed. Like we would never accuse somebody else and say, well, you're not a real Christian because you're depressed. But then sometimes don't we beat ourselves up for that? And sometimes don't we sink into an even deeper depression because it's like, man, God probably doesn't even want to be around me right now. I want you to read 1 Kings chapter 19, 5 through 8 to see how God begins to do a healing work in Elijah's life. So in what way did the angel of the Lord begin to minister to Elijah? And I'm going to be honest with you, as I read this story, it surprises me. And the second thing is, why didn't the angel fix Elijah's depression? Why didn't the angel come with like a magic wand and make the depression go away? And what do these passages say about God's concern for us? What I wanted you to see in this last section is that God is concerned with our entire well-being. God's not just concerned with our spiritual condition. He's concerned about our emotions. He's concerned about our physical well-being. And I want you to see that fixing hunger is an easy thing to do. But fixing emotional pain, man, that takes time. A few things that I want you to notice in this story. Elijah's journey sounds a lot like Jesus' journey. Remember how Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights and he was hungry, just like Elijah did. I also want you to see that throughout Elijah's ministry, it kind of parallels Jesus' ministry. Remember how the widow gives Elijah her flour, and the flour keeps multiplying? Just like Jesus needed to feed 5,000 people, and he takes 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he makes them multiply to be able to feed 5,000 people. Notice how the widow's son dies, but Elijah raises him from the dead, just as Jesus raised several people from death, the most notable being Lazarus. And the last thing I want you to notice is that Mount Horeb, historically is important because that's where Moses encountered God. But one of the things I also want you to note about Mount Horeb is it's way out of the way from where God had called Elijah to be. So read 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 9 through 12. And what is the significance of God asking Elijah, why are you here? And what do you think is the significance of the Lord not being in the wind, not being in the earthquake, not being in the fire, but rather being in a gentle whisper? Just so you know, I don't believe that there is a right answer to this last question of why God, sent a wind and he sent an earthquake and he sent a fire and he wasn't in those things. So whatever answer you came up with perhaps could be correct. But here are some of the thoughts that I had, some of the things that I learn when I see that. Number one, God doesn't always work in huge, miraculous ways. There are times when he does, but then there are times when he doesn't, that he works in more subtle ways. And the second thing I want you to see is that God will speak to us in the way that our heart needs to be spoken to. See, on Mount Carmel, Israel needed God to speak in this big, huge, miraculous way. But Elijah, his heart didn't need a huge miracle. His heart needed at that moment a still, small voice. I want you to read 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 13 through 18 now. How many people did Elijah think were loyal to God? And how many people were actually loyal to God? And how did this revelation help to heal Elijah? Elijah felt like he was the only believer still out there. Does it ever feel like that for us? Do you ever feel like you're the only faithful Christian out there? And is this feeling really based in reality? Now, how does having Christian friends and participating in small groups change our perspective about that? I want you to go back into those passages and answer these three questions. How did God heal Elijah physically? How did God heal Elijah spiritually? And how did God heal Elijah emotionally? What I want your big takeaway from this lesson to be is that God will never leave us nor forsake us. Let me say that again. God will never leave us nor forsake us. He was with Elijah when Elijah was strong, and he was with Elijah even when Elijah was doubting everything. I want you to see that he took care of Elijah's hunger to heal Elijah physically. He gave Elijah a special encounter with himself to heal Elijah spiritually. And he showed Elijah that he wasn't alone, that there were other people out there that were faithful to God to heal Elijah emotionally. One of the things that I've noticed in my own life and the life of others is that God has used small groups to do all three of those things. I've seen small groups who have banded together to help one of their members who was struggling financially with physical needs. I've seen small groups help feed each other spiritually as they open the Word of God together. And I've also seen small groups help each other emotionally as members go through hard times in their life. So the last question of this lesson is, in what ways can your small group pray for your healing today? And after you guys all answer that question, perhaps you can spend some time praying for one another and allowing God to use you to make a huge impact in each other's lives. And God bless you guys, and have a great rest of your Bible study.